Hi, hello, how are you? I hope you're having a wonderful day. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Maddie Bloom, and I'm a multi-genre author who writes primarily sci-fi and fantasy. I have one book published, This Cruel Fate, an adult dystopian fantasy that explores the aftermath of the final battle of every YA dystopia series that you've ever read. I'm currently working on my second novel, a romantic science fantasy, the first in a duology that is coming in spring 2026. And I like to make YouTube videos about books, writing craft, and vlogging my writing process. For today's video, I wanted to talk about the kinds of questions I asked myself when building my character corruption arc for Zolia, the protagonist of my book, This Cruel Fate, and what went into the process of detailing that corruption arc, because I feel like there's so much information about creating a regular character arc. And so it would have been nice to have just a little bit of a guiding hand when inverting everything to do a corruption arc. When I was editing and re-outlining and things like that, I found myself studying The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, because of course that follows a young Coriolanus Snow who goes on to become a very evil and tyrannical dictator. So it was a really good novel to follow the kinds of actions and inverted actions that Coriolanus had to take in comparison to like a normal novel or even another Hunger Games novel where these characters are on more heroic paths. I also studied the Dune movies. I could not get into the book. I tried multiple times and I just can't do it. So I did study the movies and seeing how there was that slow corruption of very good intentions on Paul Atreides' part, but of course, as he falls more and more into his destined role, he succumbs to the power that it provides. And I also, when I was going through edits and things like that, I had Netflix at the time, and randomly one night I was just like doing the endless scroll because for some reason when you have like everything to watch, there's nothing to watch. And I found this 4-part documentary, and I think it was titled like, So You Want to Be a Dictator? I was like, oh my gosh, yes, for the purposes of writing, yes. And so the documentary went over like 4 different dictators in history and how they accomplished what they accomplished and how they maintained power. So I kind of used that just as like real world examples of like the banality of evil and just like the technical aspect of it. So I found that to be kind of helpful as well in crafting a corruption arc. But I did ask myself a lot of questions, and that definitely went into play. Zolia as a character changed so much from the first, even the first like inklings of the ideas that I had, and was kind of developing them into a story. And then from the early drafts to what the final draft ended up being, there was a lot of changes, and I'm really happy with the final outcome. So I just wanted to kind of share how I got from taking this character and pushing her onto a corruption arc path. The first thing that I really sat down and thought about with myself and developed was why I wanted to build a character corruption arc in the first place, especially for my protagonist. Having a character that is edgy and evil just for the sake of being edgy and evil does not work for your main character. If you do, I think it just feels very like empty, and if there's no rhyme or reason for it, like no matter how cool you make the character, it's a lot harder to get that character to land with audiences, right? Because we don't have any of the context of why this character is the way that they are. It's this reason that Darth Vader could not have been the protagonist, but Anakin could have been. Those are other movies that I study too, because we see that progression of like good intentions, circumstances, failure to overcome the obstacles, evil character, right? Or morally gray, pretty evil. Let's be real. They all turned out pretty evil. Anyways, yeah, so I sat down and thought about what am I exploring? What is the idea that I'm exploring? And why does Zolia have to be my protagonist? And why is she on this character corruption arc? Another thing that I asked myself was, what does fully realized look like for my character? At the end of the traditional hero's journey, your character has overcome their obstacles, they have changed fundamentally, they have learned the lesson that they need to be like fully enlightened as a human being, or whatever your character is. And obviously, if you're on a corruption arc, you can't have that, because if they're fully enlightened, then they're going to live life better. So I thought it would be really important to know what that looked like for Zolia and make sure I take steps away from that. It also helped a lot in the beginning, because this is a story that starts at the end thematically of a lot of different genre stories. I needed to have her near enlightened, but a crack in the facade. So I also think it's important to identify those like fissures in your character that is going to lead to their downfall. With Zolia, it's a disparity between expectation versus reality. And I think that that is very relatable for audiences, no matter who you are. I think that there is at least one thing that has happened in your life where you had this like expectation for it and it just didn't turn out how you thought it would, and it was a bit disappointing. So I think at the beginning, you need to have a relatable flaw or a relatable crack that allows the audience to understand why the character turns out the way they do, even if they don't morally agree with it. Another thing that I thought was really important to identify and clarify is how the narrative frames their actions. Because I wanted to explore the corrupting nature of power, I did to the best of my ability to frame the actions as harmful, even if Zolia is my POV character, so I can't just like have the narrative come right out and say it. So I tried my hardest to still keep the narrative framing it as not endorsing these actions, but rather exploring these actions and allowing my characters, which I'll get into, to do a lot of that like visual shorthand of condemning her actions. I will say that how the narrative frames the actions is really important for any story you write, not just character corruption arcs. I cannot tell you how much I dislike when we are introduced to a character who's supposed to be morally gray or whatever, and they're like, oh my gosh, so mysterious. And then it turns out they're actually just like, oh, they're the best person ever. Oh, who's the best guy around. He's not evil. He's not even bad or even like morally gray at all. He was actually like just the purest, most bestest character, and your main character was stupid for thinking otherwise. I hate that. So, in my opinion, how the narrative frames your character's actions is so important. So that leads us into the next one. How do your characters react to the protagonist? And oftentimes in a traditional story, you do have foil characters or you have characters that mirror the protagonist, so you can explore the theme in different ways. And these characters are that much more necessary in a character corruption arc because it shows you, or it shows the reader, just how far the character is willing to go to achieve whatever their end goal is. And you can foil characters who experienced the same thing and overcome those obstacles and not succumbing to them. This is also where you can showcase a lot of that narrative framing and have characters push back or showcase the consequences of your protagonist's actions. For the Scroll Fate, I went through my characters and defined whether their goals aligned with Zolia's or didn't. And I had to figure out their moral compass as well. And so within their interactions, depending on what their moral compass is, they are either defending Zolia or encouraging this corruption arc, or they're actively pushing against it and showing just how far she's willing to change for this end goal. The next thing that I thought about and implemented for my character corruption arc was, how does my character get everything that they want? For a character corruption arc, we are essentially flipping the want and the need. In a traditional story, your character has a want that they think will change their life, but then they actually have a need or a lesson that they need to learn. And oftentimes, the lesson that they need to learn is something that they had the whole time, like Dorothy with the ruby slippers. Like, she pretty much had them the whole time. So that's we have to flip that on its head for a character corruption arc. They don't learn the need. They should still have one. And again, that kind of goes into, what does enlightened or what does fully realized look like for them? And how do you keep them from getting that need? And how do you keep encouraging that want and building that want larger and larger until it's inescapable? I also found it helpful to start off with a want that was a little bit broader, a little bit more vague, because as your character goes along, they start to fill that want with the corrupting forces rather than having this like clear goal that they can aspire to that keeps them on the right track. But I think you can definitely have a very clear want and still have a very strong corruption arc as well. So along with that, you need to ask yourself, how does the reward or the motivation for the corrupting acts outweigh the rewards for being good? This can be any number of things. Does your character feel at a certain point that they're just in too deep to change? And that can open up the door for a lot of like internal angst and conflict. Or is your character scared of what the other side looks like in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes? The instability and unpredictability of passion and love scared Coriolanus, and he falls back on control and power and looking out for number one, himself, the whole time. So I think having that clarified in your mind can also really help with developing those wants as the story progresses, and adds a lot of context into how they will interact with the other characters within the story. It's also important to figure out how your character resists their corruption. Any character who gives in right away to the main through line of the novel isn't going to be as compelling as someone who is on this constant push and pull of temptation or desire or whatever it is that is carrying through the entire length of the novel. So finding ways in which they still act like themselves and still act within their moral code, but they resist it and they're still trying to push against it just a little bit will really add a lot of depth and conflict to your novel. With that then, what is that final straw that makes them give in? Having that moment where it just is the point of no return is really, really important in a character corruption novel, because this is that moment that changes them forever and they cannot go back. There's no undo button. And in a character corruption arc, this is a very tragic moment and offers up a lot of that angst that I love about the character corruption arc in general. So by now, it's important to understand how the character's actions influences the relationships to other characters. And with the ending, I think it's important to think about, is there any moment where your character doubts themselves or comes to realize that they made the wrong decisions, or that they're going to live an empty life because they neglected that need within them? Or if they get everything they wanted, how do they react to that? Are they fulfilled in some way? Are they covering up this hole in their heart? Is it an empty win? Knowing how your character engages with accomplishing their goal will really also influence the framing of the narrative as well. And especially if you have a series, you can really spend some time getting into the meat of these and stretching things out as your character changes and develops. That was all of the questions that were rolling around in my head when I was shaping up Zolia's arc and really trying to search other corruption arc narratives to figure out the best way to develop Zolia as a character, especially because this is a series. So I didn't want to start pedal to the metal and just go way too fast without any space to breathe or have her continue down this path with in the next two books. So I think there is a lot of space for flexibility within these questions as well, and just taking the time to kind of invert that hero's journey and really focusing on the want rather than the need, unlike how you would in a traditional novel, is really going to take your story far and give it a lot of oomph and conflict and relatability, even though, again, we are pushing characters on this downward path rather than an upward path. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful in your writing journey. Let me know in the comments who your favorite evil or morally gray character is, whether book, movie, video game, whatever. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a thumbs up or subscribing to my channel. I try to post a few times a month, and I also do co-working live streams. So if you need some motivation to get writing, or you just want to set aside some time to read, but not do it all alone, I live stream on Thursdays and Sundays, Thursday evenings, Sunday mornings, to try and get some variety in there. And we stream for about 2 hours to get a lot of work in. But thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.